Welcome, everyone. On behalf of BioIT World's Web Symposia series, I'd like to welcome you to 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, Building and Maintaining Positive Relationships with Advocacy Groups, sponsored by BBK Worldwide. My name is Elizabeth Lamb, and I'll be the host and the technical director for today's event. Let me tell you a bit about our sponsor today. Founded in 1983, BBK Worldwide is the recognized global leader in patient recruitment. Now in its 30th year of business, BBK has accelerated time to market for thousands of new and improved treatment options by streamlining the clinical trial enrollment process through innovative strategies, programs, and technologies. When BBK's proprietary solutions are applied to the clinical research enterprise, results show that 96% of trials complete enrollment on or ahead of schedule. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. Aaron Fleshman leads the social innovation and advocacy engagement teams at BBK. Aaron's team works directly with pharmaceutical sponsors, advocacy organizations, and patient thought leaders to create innovative strategies that generate awareness surrounding clinical research opportunities for patients and their caregivers. Welcome, Aaron, and I have transferred the presenter ball to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody to this webinar called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Really excited to have you here. In preparation for this, we received a lot of great questions through when you signed up for this webinar, and hopefully I'll be able to address as many as I can through this presentation. And as Elizabeth said, we will certainly get to all of the questions at some point in time, whether it be after the presentation or through email, to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered, which is always important. As the slide says, it all starts with a story, and you'll notice as we take this journey together that I'm a big story guy. But basically, BBK was hired by a sponsor to participate, to raise awareness of a clinical research study, and the sponsor wanted to work with advocacy organizations. It was one of their top priorities. And BBK was really excited about this opportunity. Anytime you have the chance to work with advocacy organizations, whether it be to raise awareness of a specific study, maybe just clinical research in general, or perhaps other initiatives that you may have going on at the time, you should absolutely jump on that opportunity to do that. So the task in front of my group for this particular study was find the advocacy organizations to work with, raise awareness of the clinical research opportunity, and see what we could do in terms of building a relationship to generate some interest in the clinical research opportunity. One of the key factors of this story is that it was a pediatric study, and the sponsor wanted to work with the top national, most well-known organization. So as most people would probably do, I went online, I researched where this organization was, I picked up the phone, and I gave them a call. And after several phone calls and emails, I wasn't able to get through to the advocacy organization. And I certainly don't hold a grudge about that. Advocacy organizations, they're quite busy throughout the day, and they're being called upon to do more and more, whether it be in clinical research or other initiatives that may be out there. So it got me kind of thinking, if I knew someone who knew the person that I had to speak with at this advocacy organization, this whole process would be a lot easier. The approach to working with advocacy groups has changed. It's not about just one specific organization. It's about the conditioned community as a whole. It's about networking and connecting and maximizing your abilities to find as many patients as you may need. So that really brings us to the title of my talk, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. For those of you who don't know sort of where this saying came from, it all started with this movie and this concept of 6 degrees of separation, which is the idea that through 6 people, through 6 connections, everybody is connected to everyone. And then it kind of took on this fun little spin of because Kevin Bacon is like one of the top 5 actors of all time, that everybody who's in Hollywood, everybody who is an actor or an actress has a connection to Kevin Bacon through up to 6 people. And then it kind of turns into this whole thing, well, doesn't everybody have a connection to Kevin Bacon? And I know you think that's kind of crazy. How could everybody in the world have a connection to Kevin Bacon? And up until a few weeks ago, I would have agreed with you until I actually found my connection to Kevin Bacon. So this is me here, smiling all nice. Many of you on the call may know founding principal of BBK Worldwide, Bonnie Brescia. Bonnie has a nephew named David, and David went to Brown University where he studied theater with someone named Sosie Bacon. And Sosie Bacon is the daughter of Kevin Bacon. And so that is my connection to Kevin Bacon. And now that you all virtually know me so well, you also have a connection to Kevin Bacon. And you don't have to thank me for that. It's my pleasure to give you that connection. I know you're all very excited about it. And I'll pause here for a second so that you guys can just take that in, because I know it's important. So the big question, what does this have to do with advocacy groups? As I said in the beginning, the approach to working with advocacy groups has changed. It's not about one organization. It's about the conditioned community as a whole. And this is really sort of this concept and this idea is really a page right out of the advocacy organization's book. Rare Disease Day or Rare Disease Week was several weeks ago, and we certainly know that it certainly wasn't just one organization participating in that, not one organization kind of drawing people together. There was a lot of organizations that were involved in Rare Disease Day, whether it be from a condition-specific community or even outside of that. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to participate in the Parkinson's Unity Walk. And again, I found myself situation where it wasn't just one advocacy organization that kind of pulled this walk together. It was the Michael J. Fox Foundation, it was the Unity Walk, several other Parkinson's-related organizations were the people that kind of coordinated this event. And it would be weird for me to think that I'm not the only person, right, that's probably reaching out to advocacy organizations for a clinical research opportunity. So this whole idea of networking and connecting really applies to what we're trying to do. And hopefully through this, you'll see how you can make those connections, how you can keep those and maintain those connections for the study that you may have now or for future studies down the road. So let's take a look at how we can find these advocacy organizations that are out there. Everything we do at BBK starts with a social media listening program. It's market research. You can understand the patient's sentiment towards treatments. You can pick up on what tips and tricks they may have for managing side effects. But for the purpose of my team and for the purpose of what we were trying to do and what a social media listening program really gets you is where are the patients going to find out information about their condition? Because if they're going to advocacy groups, then you'll be able to see that within this program. If they're not going to advocacy groups, then you know that maybe building relationships with this specific condition for a clinical study might not be your best option. For other things, sure, but for a clinical study, it might not be the route that you want to go. So social media listening programs is the start of how we can start to find the groups that we need to work with, the connections that we need to make, and overall getting our message across about the clinical study opportunity that might be available to us. So as I ventured into this social media listening program, I found myself attending a lot of patient and caregiver communities through Facebook groups, through Twitter chats, even on LinkedIn. I found myself participating and asking people the question of, where do you go for your health information? How much do you know about clinical research? And do you know anybody at this advocacy group that I need to connect with, right? That was the beginning, that was the whole purpose of this whole initiative. Find this guy that I needed to talk to at this national organization. And so as you kind of dove into these Twitter chats and these different Facebook groups and communities, you started to kind of talk to, what we're calling over here these active, engaged participants. And these are people who share different resources, share different news articles about a specific condition, share different blog articles about a specific condition, comment on different things that are out there. And sometimes you have to look at this a little bit and make sure you understand the message of what they're saying if they are commenting, because some people do a lot of negative comments and some people do a lot of positive comments. and you're really looking for the informed person that might be doing a little bit of both, that's your active, engaged participant. And so I'm going to pause here from the story for a second just to talk about transparency for a minute because it's extremely important. When I reach out and I speak to patients or bloggers or patient advocacy groups, I'm very open with what I'm trying to accomplish. Obviously, a sponsor has to hire BBK for me to even be talking to an advocacy organization in this way. And it's so important that I give them all of the information that I possibly can about my goals and what I'm trying to do. So I always start with, and it sounds very simple, but it's, hi, I'm Aaron. I'm from BBK Worldwide, and I have a clinical study opportunity that I would like to talk to you about. It involves your condition, and this is kind of what we're looking for. And advocacy groups are beginning to get a little bit smarter when it comes to that conversation. They're working more with medical directors and starting their own medical boards. And they'll usually come back to me and say, well, hey, Aaron, what's the protocol? Can you send me the protocol for the study? And when you hear that, that's great because it means that they're highly interested, obviously. But then you also have the problem of, well, kind of need you to sign a confidentiality agreement if I'm going to send you the protocol. And I obviously have to check with the sponsor to make sure that that's okay, too. So that's why transparency is so important. Make sure that you're giving them as much information as you possibly can, why they might need to sign a CDA, so that you can talk a little bit more openly about the study with them. Transparency is extremely important. But back to the active engaged participants. The people that I met for this pediatric study, they referred me to several bloggers that I might want to connect with who may know the advocacy organization or the person in the advocacy organization that I need to speak with. And bloggers are really interesting. You know, there's these three types of bloggers. There's the negative blogger that really just likes to kind of just throw out as much negative things as they possibly can, probably because they're having a hard time with their condition or whatever. There's the well-informed blogger, sort of this neutral kind of blogger. And then there's sort of the blogger that knows everybody. And all of them certainly play a role within a condition community, but you're kind of looking for those last two. You're looking for the one that shares information. You're looking for the one that's able to connect people to people. So bloggers, in a lot of ways, are also advocacy groups in and of themselves. We've actually worked with bloggers before where they've been given us the ability to actually post a clinical study onto their blog. We've written blogs for them that they can post onto their website. So it's very important to make these kinds of connections. And going back to the transparency point, even more with these bloggers, it's very important that you have an open and honest discussion about what you're trying to accomplish. And if they're interested in working with you, rock on. They'll work with you. And if they're not, they're not. But make sure that you have that conversation. So as I traveled through these bloggers, they actually really helped me find what we're kind of calling this high-level patient advocate. This is the person that knows everybody and everybody within a condition-specific community. And they're out there. There are hundreds of these patient advocates out there. I mean, it's so surprising you're able to actually learn from a patient advocate based on sort of the conversations that you have with them. So my patient advocate, even though it says Kevin Bacon on the screen, my patient advocate knew the organization that I was trying to work with. And she even kind of pushed me in a direction that I didn't even think of. She said, Aaron, have you thought about going outside of the condition? Have you started looking into anti-bullying organizations and camps that help kids with this condition? And I said to her, no, and I actually sort of kicked myself after for not thinking about that idea on my own. I mean, people like to think that I come up with some pretty decent ideas here at BBK, and I didn't think of this one. But again, it started to, if you go back to the beginning, this whole idea of it's not about the one connection. It's about the condition community as a whole and who really plays a role in that. It's not only just these condition-specific advocacy organizations. Not every person that has a specific condition is going to go to an advocacy organization for all of their help with all of their care. They're going to look at other types of places, other types of organizations that help with the standard and quality of life that a patient might be dealing with throughout this. So it's always important, again, to cast as wide a net as possible when looking into the different types of organizations that you can work with. Back to the transparency point, Again, I think it's probably pretty clear here that most of the organizations and the camps that I spoke with that were these non-condition specific groups didn't have a lot of knowledge about clinical research, certainly didn't know what a protocol was, certainly didn't know the difference between a phase 2 and a phase 3 study. So again, that transparency is so important, and being able to do clinical research education and having that type of material available is something that is crucial when you're embarking on this kind of a journey. So non-condition specific groups, we should all be thinking about the role that they play, especially when it comes to the quality of life of a patient and what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So not only did my connection have access to these new non-condition specific organizations, but they had a connection to the advocacy group that I was first charged with trying to find. And so now I've built these connections, and I have the guy that I need to talk to, and we had a lovely phone conversation. But then it really came down to, okay, well, what can I do with this organization? What are they comfortable with in terms of outreach to their members? What is the sponsor comfortable with in terms of what we can do for outreach to their members? And we decided on a few different activities. The first one being we dropped a newsletter to all of their members. We actually ended up doing a Twitter chat of our own where we did basically a clinical research education Twitter chat where we got a lot of questions about some of the same things we've been talking about today. What's the difference between a phase 2 study and a phase 3 study? We've even gotten questions such as, what is the placebo? We've even gotten questions of, what is the standard of care that I'm expected to get when I enter a clinical study? And even more questions about, well, how, if my study visits are so far apart, maybe 2 months, 3 months, sometimes even 6 months apart, how am I going to be able to remind myself that I need to go to a doctor's appointment at a certain time? How can I stay engaged within the clinical study that I'm a part of? Very interesting kinds of conversations that we had. The advocacy group had a blog, so we wrote a blog article for them. And even on the advocacy group's website, they had a little section for clinical research, and we were able to do a website posting to their website about the clinical study that we're involved with. So then the advocacy organization asked me a very important question, and this is crucial. Aaron, what if my members don't qualify for the study that you're promoting? What happens then? Because then it feels like I'm just promoting and showing light to one study that's out there, and I'm sort of putting my organization tied to one specific sponsor. How can I ensure that that doesn't take place? And so I think sort of as we talk about standard of care when it comes to clinical research, it's important that if a patient doesn't qualify for the study that you're working on, they're clearly interested in clinical research. And we have an obligation as an industry to provide them with outlets that if it's not your study, it might be somebody else's study. And so BBK is one example. We have something called Clinical Study Notifier that does that. And I'm sure there are a lot of other organizations, sponsors, other vendors like BBK that have similar tools that are out there. And I highly, highly encourage the sponsors that may be with us today and everybody that's with us today to think about that. And if it's not your study, well, how else can I help this patient find a study that they might be available for? So we've built the relationship. We've established what we're going to do for outreach to raise awareness of this clinical study opportunity for this patient community. Now, how can we maintain this relationship? Because we just did a lot of work to build these networks and to build these connections. I want to be able to reach back out to them for the next study opportunity. So how can I maintain these relationships that I've just started to build? And we're going to talk about a few ways that you can do this now. The main portion that you have to think of is that you have to be a part of their organization. There's this common misperception that you have to have a study in order to work with an organization. And that's simply not the case. You should always be building and connecting with organizations. So let's talk about some of the ways that you can do that. And some of the things that you'll see here, some of you may be doing already, and some you might seen along the way. One of the things that we always recommend is that attend a walk. It doesn't have to be sponsored by a pharmaceutical company. It doesn't have to be a big initiative, but attend a walk. Attend a walk that these advocacy organizations put into place. That's a great way to do it. We've also seen at some of the conferences that we've been attending, more patient advocates coming on stage to give presentations. I'd like to see more opportunities where the sponsor walks up on stage with one of these patient advocates to do a presentation. Maybe one of the advocacy organizations walk up on stage and do a presentation with them. What a great relationship building tactic that is. Another thing we've seen a lot of is that more and more sponsors are adding clinical trials like registries or ways that you can find clinical trials onto their website, and that's located in one section of the website. And then if you keep navigating through the sponsor's website, you'll find that there's this list of advocacy organizations that they do some sort of relationship with, whether it could be a number of different things. Well, you're halfway there. Connect the two together, right? Make them aware of the fact that you have this clinical study registry on your website, and bring the two of them together. So we'd like to see a little bit more of that in the future, and certainly BBK and other vendors can help you get to that point. The final way that you can do this is through app development. And my real 5-second sales pitch to everybody on the phone is that BBK can help you do this app development. But nothing builds stronger relationships than collaborating on a project together. And that's one of the things that building an app and using this kind of technology can do. If you have as we talked about in the previous slide, if you have clinical studies listed on your website and you have organizations also listed on your website, collaborate with them together to build an app that lists the advocacy organizations, what their involvement is, perhaps even their events that are coming up, and put the clinical study registry that you've already built into this app. This type of technology, it's still new to our industry, but it's not new everywhere else. And even within a pediatric study, which we started this whole story with, the caregiver, the mother, the father would absolutely download something like that. So think about the technology that's out there and ways that you can use it to maintain some of these relationships that we've been talking about today. So it started with one, right? I had to reach out to one organization for clinical study outreach. That was the beginning of this whole story. And I realized that as I was doing that and I was going along the way, one turned into many, and many turned into even more. And I realized that I had built this huge connection base, not only for the study that I was promoting, but for clinical research awareness in general and future studies that might be coming down the road. So let's recap really quickly here. I could call Kevin Bacon tomorrow and tell him how much I love the movie Footloose. I mean, who didn't love that movie? But would he really take that call if he had absolutely no idea who I was? No. He probably gets calls about that all the time. Footloose is amazing. But through my connections, I happen to have a connection to his daughter. Maybe that would be a way that I could really get to Kevin Bacon and tell him how much I love the movie Footloose. It starts with the social media listening. It's the only way to figure out where you're going to go and how you're going to do it. It's the only way to build the connections to find the people that you need to talk to. Once you find those people, let's not forget to be transparent, right? Open and honest about what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to do. Find yourself working with active engaged participants online. And then when you find that advocacy organization and when you find the many organizations that you want to work with, figure out what the comfort level is that you can do outreach for. When I began the presentation, I said that we had received questions before we even started this about different things and about how to work with advocacy organizations. And one of the great questions that I received was, when do you do outreach? What's the timing look like? How do you know when an advocacy organization should drop an email or should drop a newsletter? So I pulled this slide here for you to kind of see how BBK thinks about advocacy outreach in terms of the greater picture of doing patient recruitment for a study. We really consider it to be a media buy. It's the same type of thing. And if you've worked with BBK before, or maybe even other vendors, you've heard of this idea of stacking tactics. And if you think about sort of this whole presentation, it really does make sense, right? The one tactic isn't going to get everything that you need to get accomplished. It's not just about the one. It's the conditioned community as a whole. So as you can see here on the slide, we had online advertising, we had some streaming radio, we had a traditional radio spot, and we did advocacy outreach. And you can see from the top when those were dropping and what we decided to do. It just so happened that the awareness month that we were working for was in line with when we wanted to do study outreach. So again, it's really sort of part of your media, your advertising plan. That's when you can figure out and you can say to an advocacy organization, okay, now's the time that you send out that email. Now's the time that you send out that newsletter. So I thought that this was really important because that was a great question that I received and I wanted to share it with you throughout this presentation. Because I received so many great questions and I knew that I would not have enough time to answer them all here, I wrote a blog on BBK's website that answers some more of those questions. And in fact, I'll be doing another blog next week to answer even more of the questions that I've received. But please check out our blog, Innovative Ideas for Global Patient Recruitment, and you'll find some of the answers to those questions that are out there. With that, I just want to say thank you, and we'll take a look at some of the questions that you've been chiming in with, and we'll try to answer some of them. Okay, so we received a couple questions about social media. What is a Twitter chat? A Twitter chat is basically sort of, if you think about it, just like a meeting, but it's a meeting online. It's a meeting through Twitter. What you have to do is you have to set up a hashtag, and a hashtag is a way that you can follow a conversation on Twitter. And basically what you do is you set up a time, just like we set up a time for this webinar. You promote it through different social media channels, and everybody hops onto Twitter at a certain period of time and uses the hashtag that you create. So we'll do an example hashtag really quickly of We Love Kevin Bacon, right? So let's say we were doing a Twitter chat just on Kevin Bacon. If you wanted to follow along with that conversation, you would start a tweet and you put in the hashtag We Love Kevin Bacon, and that's how you could follow the conversation. So that's kind of just sort of a good relationship building tool that you can use. So that's really what a Twitter chat is. Just basically like a meeting or like a webinar, but instead of doing it through this type of a means, you're doing it through Twitter. Tell us more about BBK's social media listing program. Great question for whoever asked that one. BBK's social media listing program, like I said, it's like market research. We are able to determine, as I said, different websites that patients go to. We can determine the geographic location of where clusters of patient populations are and where a lot of advocacy organizations are, and that can always be helpful in selecting sites that you may want to work with on a particular study. And so that's really what it's designed to do. It gives us a great idea of the patient pulse of the community, and it helps us in terms of our messaging strategy and the creative materials that we create to raise awareness of a specific study. We're able to figure all that out through really, social media listening. It's market research, through this market research program that we've designed. And this type of programming is available through our technology platform, Trial Central Net. Okay, Clinical Study Notifier, tell us more. What we like to do is, with every study that we work on, we always set up a study website for patients to first see if they can qualify for the study before they're contacted by the site. Within that website, if they don't qualify for the study, we put at the end of the website that they can sign up for something that we like to call Clinical Study Notifier. And again, that's available in a number of different ways. Sponsors have these, other vendors have these. But really the idea is to keep patients engaged in clinical research. If they've gone through the trouble of, clicking on an advertisement or finding something through an advocacy group, they're really engaged in clinical research, and you don't want to lose them to that opportunity. So what Clinical Study Notifier does is you sign up through email, and we're able to notify you when another study is available. What if my company has an advocacy group program? How can I work with BBK? Well, you'd probably contact me, but other than that, we can sit down and really assess the types of advocacy groups that you work with and what your program is and how you're designed and how you're using it. And again, I think we would use some of the methods that we talked about today to really raise awareness of clinical research and clinical research opportunities. So BBK can help you with that. It's always great when the sponsor does the initial outreach to the advocacy groups. Sometimes when BBK reaches out to advocacy organizations, there's a little bit of confusion as to what BBK's role is versus what the sponsor's role is. But BBK can help you find these advocacy groups, can help you develop programs, can help you promote awareness to these advocacy groups that you might be working with already. Those are the different types of ways that BBK can help. Do you use the same approach with all advocacy groups? That's a great, great, great question. No, we don't. I mean, the beginning of it, yes, we always do social media listening before anything to find the organizations that we want to work with, but the approach that we take isn't always the same. I mean, we've run across some advocacy groups that have just absolutely no interest at all in doing anything involving clinical research. And so, that's fine too, and we obviously don't interact with them then. Some advocacy organizations really just don't have the level of understanding about what clinical research is. So you would see that an approach that we would always take with that type of an organization is to start with the education process. What is a clinical trial? What is a phase 1 study? What is a placebo? All the things that we've been kind of talking about today. So really, it all depends on what the advocacy organization's comfort level is with the program that you've designed and what you're trying to accomplish. So no, we don't always use the same approach in terms of building the relationships, in terms of doing the clinical study outreach, but finding the advocacy groups to work with, we always do the same approach. What about different languages, countries for global studies? Another very good question, and I actually answered this question in my blog, and I think it really ties together with sort of the question above, and that is that no matter where you are in the world, no matter what you're up to in the world, no matter what your program is designed to do, every advocacy organization is a little bit different. So for BBK, if we're trying to do a global study and work globally with advocacy groups, we would call on our strategic alliance partners to help us with that. We have partners located around the world that obviously speak the language probably better than I would. I know a little bit of German and a little bit of French, but that's really my extent right there. So we would obviously want to work, we would work with our alliance partners to find the advocacy groups to work with. But again, there obviously are some different, restrictions and policies that happen in every country. But at the base level, at a very base level understanding, every advocacy organization is a little bit different. And so really those two questions go well hand in hand in that you really just have to evaluate the situation and assess the situation to figure out what your best appropriate action is. Tell us about IRB approval of blogs and Twitter. Good question. So that's why when it comes to a Twitter chat, going back to that first question, we don't talk about a study specifically. We talk about the idea of what clinical research is and educate the patient population on how they can get involved. So it's really not something that we do that's tied to a study, so that's really important to sort of have that distinction. In terms of the blog, again, thinking about the fact that we think about advocacy groups and reaching out to them as a media buy, just as sort of your commercials have to be IRB approved, the blog article that you would write on a blog's website or on the website of an advocacy group would have to be IRB approved as well, because that's study-specific information, just like any advertising that you would do for outreach for a clinical research opportunity. Lots of questions here. I love it. Okay, we'll keep going. Do advocacy groups allow you to post your study on their website? Yes, some do. And again, you have to really evaluate the situation, evaluate the tactics. Are they comfortable with that? And again, it kind of just goes back to that transparency of, just really coming out flat out and saying, hey, advocacy group, I'd really like to post something on your website. Are you comfortable with that? And if you're not comfortable with that, what are you comfortable with? So yes, we've worked with advocacy groups that allow us to post information on their website. Do advocacy groups charge for posting opportunities? Not that we've seen, but I think that kind of goes back to the whole maintaining the relationship and building the relationship portion of this presentation. If they're doing something for us, what are you going to do for them, right? And I'm sure, certain advocacy organizations might just say, yeah, well, just give us money, and that's kind of weird. And I know that there are a lot of, regulatory restrictions that would happen there for sponsors to be able to do something like that. So again, I kind of go back to the whole idea of what can you do with them to build awareness and generate positive relationships? Is it a Twitter chat? Is it working to build an app together? What are the types of things that you can build together to maintain that relationship so that they feel like they're getting something out of it just as much as you are? When should you engage advocacy groups? Before the protocol development? Yeah, absolutely. You should be engaging with advocacy groups every day if you could. There's never a wrong time to be engaging with advocacy groups and building those relationships. Obviously, sponsors, you know your study pipelines better than everybody else does, and so you know where you would need to start looking and what organizations by condition you would need to start working with. But you should always, always, always be working with advocacy groups to maintain some sort of relationship with them. Tell us about apps compliance. How does it get approved? Okay, it really kind of depends on what app you're building, right? So we've built apps before. I'm trying not to be as salesy as possible here because I don't want that to be the design of this. But we've built apps before. One of them is called My Clinical Study Buddy, and that is an app that's kind of like a visit-by-visit guide for patients who are involved in a study. So that's one way of doing it. If we're just talking about apps that build relationships with advocacy organizations or try to give people a clinical research education as a whole, you know, there really aren't too many compliance issues that you have to deal with in terms of that, especially when you're working with a vendor like BBK who can kind of manage that type of relationship for you. All you're doing is raising awareness of clinical research, and you're providing an outlet for people to find out more information and see if there's a study that they qualify for. And there's certainly nothing that's wrong with that in terms of compliance. So that type of thing wouldn't get approved. You wouldn't need that kind of IRB approval for. With regards to My Clinical Study Buddy, the app that BBK has built, where it's a visit-by-visit guide when a patient is already enrolled into the study, that absolutely has to be IRB approved. Now we're talking about a specific study. Now we're involved in a specific study, and anything like that would need to be approved. How do you handle negative posts? And I guess I'm assuming that's towards a Twitter chat or towards a blog article or something like that. It just kind of, you know, part of me wants to answer the question of it just sort of comes with the territory of working with advocacy groups and doing Twitter chats and things like that. But I think, you know, the more transparent you are, the more that you're attempting to build the relationships, the more that you are using programs like Clinical Study Notifier, the less you'll find in these terms of negative posts, because really all you're trying to do is raise awareness of your initiative. And there's certainly nothing wrong with just raising awareness of your initiative. So sure, we've seen negative posts before. They happen sometimes they don't. But, you know, the best way to handle it is you can either A, ignore it, B, try to comment on it and say, why are you feeling this way? Again, sort of back to that whole transparency thing, try to get into a dialogue about it. But those are kinds of the different ways that we would handle negative posts. They happen. There's not much that you can do about them, so you just have to take that for what it's worth in terms of if you want to implement these types of programs. But, you know, when I'm asked this question, I always tell people to go on Twitter and search the hashtag Best Buy. Best Buy gets negative posts like every day of the week and thousands of them. And Best Buy still does pretty good for themselves. So there are ways around getting, you know, around negative posts. If you're building a Facebook page and you want to sort of control these negative posts, you can actually set up a Facebook page that all comments have to be approved by you before allowing them to be on the Facebook page. And another example that I would encourage people to look at is if you go to Coca-Cola's Facebook page, they have something there called House Rules. And what that is really a description of what this Facebook group and what this Facebook page is designed to do. And so people who go into this group and like that page, there's a certain level of expectation about how they're going to act. And if they don't act that way, you can throw them out of the group, or you don't have to approve their comments. So that's another way of looking at it. Tell us more about global advocacy organizations. So we've talked a little bit about that, but I think that, you know, one of the other things that we can say in terms of that is there are some organizations that obviously have multiple chapters in multiple countries. And again, you really kind of have to think about the idea of how a local chapter can help you. If you have a global study and there's an advocacy organization, you know, near where you might set up a site, you're going to want to try to figure out a way to work with that organization and to work with that site. That's probably a good idea. Again, for us, We have our strategic alliance that helps us with these kinds of things. They're called upon quite often to find advocacy organizations in the way that we would here. They are completely downloaded to our social media listening program, experts at Trial Central Net and using that program. So again, we would really work with our partners to help us accomplish that goal. What about advocacy groups not active on social media? I think that the same thing applies. You don't have to use social media to engage with advocacy groups. We use social media listening programs to find advocacy groups, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to be the way that we work with them. Again, walks, we've actually worked with a sponsor who had a site go to a specific chapter to do a clinical research education forum. So we've seen different ways that you can do it. Social media is just one avenue, right? We're talking about stacking our tactics. What's the level of comfort for an advocacy organization? That's what you have to figure out, and you have to sort of determine whether social media is going to be the right outlet for you. Have you developed an app that works directly with advocacy groups? Yes, we have. We've done a program called Pave the Way, and we use our app Health Info Gizmo and Advocacy Avenue to create that app. And really what it does is it gives a specific list of resources of advocacy organizations that are out there. We allow them to provide content about the condition specific to this app. They're able to post sort of the different walks or events that they may be involved with. And we do this sort of on a level for our sponsors so that they can start to build relationships with advocacy organizations on their own. So yes, we've done apps directly with advocacy groups. And again, it's just a really great relationship building tactic. The ability, as I said before, nothing builds stronger relationships than collaborating on something together. And I think that an app in today's day and age, the technology that's involved in it, it's just a great way to go. Tell us more about Facebook or advocacy groups there. Yes, a lot of advocacy groups have Facebook pages, but again, if they don't have a Facebook page, maybe that's something that they're interested in, and maybe that's something that you can help them build. But most advocacy organizations now have Facebook pages. And again, you can use that page to promote a study. Obviously, anything that you were going to do in terms of promoting that study, you would have to get IRB approved. It's just like an advertisement that you would put on Google or a radio spot that you would do about a specific study. That type of thing would have to be IRB approved, but we've seen that happen before. So yeah, most advocacy groups are on Facebook. And again, if they're not, that might be a great way for you to start building a relationship with them. And again, BBK can help you do that. Have you helped an advocacy group build their own app? Yes, we have, and actually we are currently in the process of building another one. Actually, it's a good question. For this study that this story kind of came out of, there's this organization called Champions Against Bullying. We're actually working with them right now to develop an app for them, for their own members and their own organization. What other tools can sponsors use to engage? So we talked a little bit about social media. We talked a little bit about apps, attending walks. We've certainly seen programs where sponsors kind of help with the organization of an event. We've seen sponsors that want to, again, like another example that I gave before of going to an organization, going to a specific chapter and doing some sort of clinical research education program. It also doesn't have to be all about clinical research, right? You can sort of just build relationships with advocacy groups just to sort of build those types of things for your company as a whole. But those are, the types of tools that we've been talking about today are the types of tools that we find to be most effective. Do you know a way to quickly and efficiently build an app? Yes, you call BBK Worldwide. We've actually partnered with one of the top app development companies in the world. They're called Metal Mobile. You can check them out if you'd like. But we actually have a platform. Again, I'm trying to not make this as salesy as possible. I apologize if it's a little bit like that. But we have a platform called Customized Study App or Customized Sponsor App, where you can kind of come into us, talk to us, tell us what you want to build, and we can build it very quickly for you. We've kind of built a platform that makes that easier to do. How to maintain long-term relationships. So I think that's, again, I keep going back to it, but that's why an app is just so great. You can keep up to date with advocacy organizations through this app. You're always going to be wanting new content to be putting on the app. It's really just sort of the best way that I could say for you to do that is just sort of through developing an app or through developing a social media page, or perhaps advocacy organizations, they're kind of stuck for time and they need just help sort of printing brochures that they might need, or flyers, or maybe a new logo for the advocacy group that they might want. Any and all of those things are great relationship building tools. Are there concerns with sponsors building a relationship with advocacy groups that could be deemed as inappropriately influencing recruitment? I don't think so. I think, again, if you're staying within the realm of, I'm a sponsor, I work on clinical research, I'm trying to raise awareness of clinical research as a tool to possibly help people, manage their condition as effectively as possible. I don't see how that could be found to be in a negative light. I think once you get into the specific reaching out for a specific clinical study, you just have to get all of your things IRB approved as you would now. As long as you're following that process, I think that should work out fine. What if our sponsor company has concerns about advocacy? What do we do? I think in the same way that you're going to, if you were to connect with an advocacy group, in the same way that you're going to ask them, what is your comfort level? You have to kind of determine what your comfort level is going to be as an organization as well. Again, the best advice that I can give, what I would say, is that if you're not going to work with the advocacy group and somebody calls me to work with the advocacy group, I'm going to be working with that group. So you might as well do it. There's a significant patient community at these advocacy organizations. It's almost weird that, not weird, I shouldn't say that, but it's not in your best interest in terms of a strategy and a tactic to be raising awareness of your clinical study to not work with an advocacy organization. So again, I would say go into go to your company, figure out what your comfort level is, but know that everybody else is doing it, so you might as well jump on board. How do you customize content for the app? I think the advocacy organization is going to know more about the condition and what patients want to read about more than we will. So you're really going to be kind of relying on them to look into that, to get that content and to put that onto an app or onto a Facebook page or onto a newsletter or whatever the case may be. Oh, what is our blog? Our blog is innovations.bbkworldwide.com. Again, innovations.bbkworldwide.com. Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. I really want to thank everybody for the questions that they've come up with. It's really sort of helped push this program along. A lot of great, interesting questions. Again, check out the blog, innovations.bbkworldwide.com, for some of the answers. After this session, I'm gonna write another one for everybody and post that as well, so I can get to some of the questions that I didn't get to, and I apologize for not getting to them all. But we'll take it from there, and you can always contact BBK for more of your questions. But stay tuned to the blog. If you read the blog, you can sign up and actually download an ebook from the blog specifically that can also answer some of these questions for you. Again, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the time, and I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth now, but hopefully look forward to speaking with some of you in the near future to help you build your advocacy connections and raise awareness of your clinical studies. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for the presentation. I'd like to thank all of you who attended today on behalf of BioIT World's Global Web Symposia and BBK Worldwide. I thank you for spending an hour of your day with us. Have a great day. Bye-bye.